Ryan Mitchell grabbed the training knife out of her hand. He held it up in front of 30 soldiers and laughed. "You've been sitting here polishing this thing like it's a trophy. You want to play soldier, sweetheart? Let me show you what this is actually for." He drove the blade into the wooden bench, one hard, deliberate strike inches from her fingers. The yard went dead silent. She didn't flinch, didn't move, just looked at him with those gray eyes completely still. Ryan spread his arms wide, turned to the crowd. Anybody else want to defend her? Nobody did. Subscribe to our channel and follow this story all the way to the end. Drop a comment and tell us what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story has traveled. The morning Ryan Mitchell decided to humiliate Captain Claire Dawson was the same morning his entire understanding of what it meant to be a soldier began to collapse. He didn't know that yet. He wouldn't know it for several days. But the process started at approximately 6:47 in the morning in the side yard behind the equipment building at Fort Blackridge, Virginia, when Ryan spotted a woman sitting alone on a wooden bench with a training knife in her hands and made a decision that would follow him for the rest of his career. The decision to make her his example. Fort Blackridge was not the kind of place that forgave mistakes. Every person who walked through those gates had survived something, a selection process, a deployment, a decade of preparation, and they carried that survival in the way they moved, the way they talked, and especially in the way they sized up everyone around them. The Special Operations Assessment Program had been running at Blackridge for 11 years. It had produced some of the most effective operators in the United States military. It had also, at various points, destroyed careers, broken bones, and ended the ambitions of men who believed confidence alone was enough to carry them through. The program was brutal by design. Not physically brutal, though the physical demands were extreme. Brutal in the way it exposed the gap between what a soldier believed about themselves and what they actually were. Most people who arrived at Blackridge arrived with a story they told themselves. A story about ability, about toughness, about readiness. The program's entire purpose was to test that story against reality and see which one survived. Ryan Mitchell had a very specific story about himself. I was 27 years old. He had completed Ranger School at 23, had served 2 tours in a high-activity theater, and had returned stateside with a record that any recruiter would have framed and put on a wall. He was fast, he was strong, he had excellent tactical instincts in the field and excellent social instincts in the room. He knew how to read situations, he knew how to move people, he knew how to establish himself as the person others looked to when things became uncertain. That ability to naturally rise to the top of any group, to become the reference point, the standard, the person whose opinions shaped everyone else's, was something Ryan had always taken for granted. It was as natural to him as breathing. He hadn't worked for it exactly. He had simply grown into it the way some people grow into height or a particular color of eyes. It was just what he was, and for 27 years it had never failed him. He arrived at Blackridge on a Tuesday morning in late October, carrying a duffel bag, a folder of commendations, and the kind of quiet certainty that comes from never having been seriously wrong about yourself. He introduced himself to the other candidates the way he introduced himself to everyone, direct control projecting, just enough warmth to seem approachable, and just enough edge to signal that approachable had limits. Within 48 hours, he had already become the informal gravity center of the group. People ate breakfast near him. People asked his opinion during tactics discussions. People laughed louder when he was in the room. It happened without orchestration. It simply happened. The candidates in Ryan's cohort were not ordinary soldiers. They were people who had survived their own selection processes, their own deployments, their own proving grounds. They were collectively among the most accomplished group of individuals he had ever been around. And yet the hierarchy formed the same way it always did, because hierarchy always forms, and Ryan always ended up near the top. He told himself this was earned. He told himself it reflected ability. He did not examine the story very carefully. He didn't need to. Not until Claire Dawson. He first noticed her on the 3rd morning. She wasn't hard to notice exactly. She wasn't hiding. But she occupied a particular kind of space that Ryan had trouble categorizing at first. She sat behind the equipment building away from the main yard, where most candidates gathered in the morning before the first session began. She was in uniform. She had a training knife in her hands. She was cleaning it with a small cloth, slow and methodical, the way someone might clean a pair of glasses or sharpen a pencil. Not a dramatic gesture, not a performance, just a quiet, functional thing she was doing while the world ran its noise somewhere else. Ryan watched her for a moment from across the yard. She hadn't introduced herself in the first 2 days. He would have remembered. She hadn't spoken up in the morning. Briefings, hadn't volunteered during the team-building exercises, hadn't made herself known in any of the usual ways. She was simply there, present, occupying space without claiming it. He noticed that the senior instructors sometimes glanced toward her. Not at her with the critical assessment they gave everyone else, the kind of measuring look that evaluated posture and attention and the thousand small signals that indicated whether someone was tracking or drifting. The look they gave her was different. It was shorter, quieter, like they had already completed an assessment they were keeping to themselves. Ryan filed that away without understanding it. What he understood was what he saw. A woman sitting alone, no visible achievement patches, no unit identifier he recognized, no signals of status that he could read. Just the uniform, the bench, the knife, and that unhurried motion. And something about that unhurried motion bothered him. He couldn't have articulated it in that moment. He didn't try. He had a feeling, not an instinct, exactly more like a mild irritation that someone who sat apart from the group and cleaned a training blade without apparent interest in the world happening 15 meters away was making a statement of some kind. A statement that he didn't like without knowing why. He walked toward her. The side yard gravel made a particular sound when someone walked across it, a dry, distinctive crunch that traveled clearly in the morning air. She heard him coming. He knew she heard him because the motion of the cloth against the blade didn't change at all. If she'd been unaware, the sound would have made her look up. If she'd been surprised, some small adjustment would have run through her posture. Neither happened. She just kept cleaning. That bothered him more. "You've been at that for a long time," Ryan said. He said it pleasantly. He was good at pleasantly. "What are you on your second hour?" "Clothes," Claire said. She didn't look up. "You planning on eating with it or?" She let the silence have the end of the question. He waited for her to look up. She didn't. "I'm just saying," Ryan continued, and now several candidates who had been nearby were drifting closer without obviously drifting closer. The particular physics of a crowd that senses something potentially entertaining. "A clean knife doesn't make you dangerous." "No," Claire said simply. He waited again. She still didn't look up. "So what does," he asked. He said it with a small smile. He was giving her the opening. He was being generous with it. She considered the question for a moment, still working the cloth. "Experience," she said. "Sure," Ryan said, "but you have to use it first. Can't get experience sitting behind a building, polishing metal." Now she looked up. She had gray eyes. That was the first thing he actually registered about her face. Not her age, not any particular expression, but the color of her eyes, which were an unusual gray that read as completely still. Not cold, not warm, still. "Are you trying to make a point?" she asked. "I'm trying to have a conversation," Ryan said, which was a small lie, and both of them probably knew it. "All right," Claire said. She held his gaze. "Have it." He hadn't expected that either. He'd expected a defense. He'd expected her to explain herself what she was doing. Why she sat apart, where she came from, the kind of biographical self-justification people offered when they felt sized up. He'd prepared for several versions of that conversation. He hadn't prepared for permission. "Okay," Ryan said. Now he was genuinely improvising, which almost never happened to him. "I'm saying in a program like this, you have to show what you can do. Sitting back doesn't earn you anything." "I wasn't aware I needed to earn something from you," Claire said. 3 candidates nearby heard that. He felt them hear it. His jaw tightened slightly. Not much, but some. "I'm talking about the program," he said. "Are you?" she asked. The stillness in her eyes was extraordinary. She wasn't challenging him with heat or aggression or any of the signals he knew how to respond to. She was just asking, just sitting there with a question that somehow felt much larger than the words. "Look," Ryan said, and now he adjusted his approach, going warmer. Going almost collegial, because that was the move when the first approach wasn't landing. "I've been watching the group the last couple of days. You're good, okay? You're clearly here for a reason." "That's generous," Claire said. "But in this kind of program, the instructors notice who leads, who puts themselves forward. You've got to make yourself visible." She looked at him for a moment. Then she said, "Why, just that?" He blinked. "Because," he started. "Why does capability have to be visible?" she asked, and her tone wasn't combative. It was genuinely curious, the way someone asks a question they've been sitting with for a long time and have decided to finally ask out loud. "You're assuming that if I'm not announcing myself, I must not have anything to announce. What if the assumption is wrong?" The yard was very quiet now. 8 people were close enough to have heard everything. Ryan felt his footing shift in some way he couldn't immediately identify. "Fine," he said. "Show me." "Show you what?" "The knife," he said. He reached to the rack nearby and lifted a training blade, rubberized tip, standard issue for contact demonstrations. "Let's see what you know." Claire looked at the training blade in his hand. She looked at him. "You really want that?" she asked. "I really want that," he said. The pause she gave him was not the pause of someone gathering confidence or measuring risk. It was the pause of someone deciding whether to proceed with something they had already completely decided about. The pause of a person checking one final time whether the other person understood what they were stepping into. He did not understand. She stood up. By the time the demonstration began, which took another 4 minutes, word having moved through Fort Blackridge with the particular speed of news that people sense before they hear, there were 31 candidates and 4 instructors arranged around the training mat in the side yard. People had come from the cafeteria. People had come from the bunk area. One candidate had come wearing a boot with no lace because he'd been in the middle of dressing when someone told him something was happening. Ryan stood at one edge of the mat, training blade loose in his right hand. He was still confident. He was annoyed, but he was confident. Whatever she was about to show him, he had experience on his side. He had trained with some of the best close combat instructors in the Army. He had competition experience. He had actual operational experience, the kind that happened in conditions that were nothing like a training mat in Virginia. He was good. He knew he was good. He did not know that knowing you are good and being prepared for what is about to happen to you are 2 different things. Claire stepped onto the mat. She didn't roll her shoulders. She didn't shake out her hands. She didn't go through any of the pre-engagement rituals that signal a person moving from social mode to combat mode. She simply stepped onto the mat and stood there, blade held at her side, and looked at him with those still gray eyes. "Rules?" she asked. "Control contact," said one of the senior instructors. Master Sergeant David Okafor, a lean 42-year-old from Georgia, who had spent 16 years in special operations and who Ryan had noticed in the previous 2 days, was among the most difficult people in the building to read. "No strikes to the face or neck. Demonstrate control, not damage. Stop on command." "Understood," Claire said. Ryan said nothing. He was already watching her stance, cataloging what it told him, calculating entry points and timing windows. He knew how to read a fighter from their starting position. He was good at this. Her starting position told him almost nothing. That was unusual. Most people, even experienced fighters, broadcast something from their stance. A preference for a side, a hint of where they were comfortable, a slight lean or weight distribution that indicated how they planned to move. Training sharpened these signals, but it also ingrained them because humans are pattern creatures, and movement is the deepest kind of pattern. Claire's stance told him essentially nothing. It was neutral to a degree that felt almost deliberate, not the neutrality of someone who hadn't made a decision about their body yet, but the neutrality of someone who had made so many decisions that they didn't need to telegraph any of them. He attacked first. He was fast. He knew he was fast. He had been told his speed was his primary asset in close quarters contact, and he believed this because the evidence supported it. She moved. Not away, not backward, not in the direction he had calculated her most efficient retreat path to be. She moved into him at an angle a fraction of a second after his motion committed, and a fraction of a second before it arrived, and the result was that his attack landed in the space she had just vacated, while her arm redirected the force of it in a direction that turned his own momentum into a problem. He recovered. He was good enough to recover quickly. He attacked, again different angle, faster entry, trying to get inside her adjustment window. She was already inside it. She was always already one decision ahead of him, and he did not understand how that was possible because he was not slow. He was not sloppy. He was not making obvious mistakes. "She's not reacting," someone behind Ryan said quietly. A woman's voice. He didn't have attention to spare for identifying who. "She's predicting." He heard that. He didn't want to believe it. He increased his speed. She remained calm. He changed the angle of his second combination mid-sequence, which was a high-level adjustment that required significant neural processing under pressure, and most opponents, most very good opponents, experienced at least a half beat of lag when he did it. She experienced no lag. She was already where he was going to be. After the sixth exchange, Ryan stepped back. His breathing was elevated. His jaw was tight. Every trained instinct he had was firing at once, producing assessments he didn't know what to do with. "You're just avoiding," he said. He meant it as an accusation. "No," she said. She wasn't breathing hard at all. "Then what are you doing?" he demanded. She considered the question. "Managing," she said. "Managing what?" "Everything," she said. "You, the mat, the distance, the angle of your shoulder when you commit to a right side entry, which happens approximately 1.3 seconds after you reset your weight. I'm managing the information." He stared at her. Around the mat, 31 people were completely silent. "You're making me predictable," Ryan said. He said it flatly because he suddenly understood, or began to understand, that this was exactly what was happening, and the understanding was not comfortable. "You made yourself predictable," she said. "I just noticed it." He came at her hard, not strategy, not calculation, pride. She knew it the moment it started. He could see that she knew it, which was the worst possible thing to be able to see, because it meant his pride was as readable as a weather vane, and she had been watching it the whole time. She moved, redirected, used the momentum he gave her. Ryan Mitchell hit the mat. Not hard, not within any drama. He simply went from vertical to horizontal in a way that his body understood completely, and his mind struggled to process, and he lay there for 1 second, staring at the sky above Fort Blackridge, Virginia, while 31 colleagues and 4 senior instructors watched without making a sound. He got up. Claire was standing where she had been standing. She hadn't moved after the redirect. She hadn't moved to press an advantage or demonstrate dominance or make a point with her body language. She was just standing there, waiting. And then she said the thing that would stay with Ryan Mitchell for the rest of his life. The thing he would eventually repeat to his own candidates years later in a different yard, in a different season. "Your problem isn't your knife skills." He looked at her. "It's your judgment," she said. Not unkindly, not cruelly, just simply, the way someone states a fact about the weather. The 31 candidates on the edge of the mat heard it. The 4 instructors heard it. And the silence that followed was the specific silence of a large group of people processing something they recognize as true, even though they are watching it happen to someone else. Ryan stood on the mat with the training blade still in his hand, and the story he had been telling himself for 27 years developed for the first time a crack he could feel. He didn't know what to say. He had never not known what to say. How he finally asked, it was the first honest thing he had said since he walked across the gravel to the equipment bench that morning. Claire tilted her head slightly. "How what?" she asked. "How did you know every move before I made it?" She thought about this for a moment. Not because she was searching for the answer. It seemed more like she was deciding how much of the answer was useful to give him right now. "You have very good technique," she said. "The technique is so solid that you trust it completely. When you trust something completely, you stop questioning it. When you stop questioning it, it becomes fixed. And fixed things," she said, "can be read." Ryan absorbed that. His ego was loud right now. His ego was generating a great deal of noise in the direction of objections, counter-arguments, reasons why this analysis was incomplete or incorrect or applicable to a scenario other than the one that just happened. He had a lot of practice listening to his ego. He was good at giving it what it wanted, but there was something underneath the noise, a quieter thing, and the quieter thing was saying she's right. "What's your background?" he asked. Claire stepped off the mat. "Ask your instructors," she said. "They know." She picked up her cloth from the bench. She sat down, and she went back to cleaning the blade. Around the yard, the 31 candidates were still not talking. Not yet. They were still in the strange altered state that follows watching something that reorganizes expectations. Slowly, in the way that water eventually flows after a dam breaks, conversation began to return. But it was different conversation than it had been before. Quieter, more considered. Ryan stood in the middle of the mat. He looked at Master Sergeant Okafor, who was standing at the edge of the crowd with his arms crossed, and an expression that Ryan now realized had been present every time he had noticed Okafor look in Claire's direction. Not assessment, but recognition. Not measurement, but familiarity. Who is she? Ryan asked. Okafor looked at him. You should have asked that before you challenged her, Okafor said. I'm asking now. I know, Okafor said. He looked at Claire on the bench. He looked back at Ryan. Go clean up. Briefing in 40 minutes. He paused. We'll talk after. Ryan looked at Claire one more time. She wasn't looking at him. She was working the cloth along the blade the same way she had been when he first walked over. The same unhurried motion, the same complete absence of interest in his reaction. He had mocked her for it 90 minutes ago. Now he stood on a mat where she had just taken him apart, and he looked at her sitting there, and he understood, or began to understand, that the unhurried motion wasn't indifference. It was a kind of completeness. A person who had nothing to prove because the proving had already happened in places he hadn't been, in situations he couldn't fully imagine. He walked off the mat. His legs were steady. His body was fine. Physically, the demonstration had barely touched him. The rest of him was a different story. In the 40 minutes between the mat and the briefing, Ryan sat alone in a side room and tried to reconstruct what had happened. Not the mechanics of it. He understood the mechanics. He had the training to understand them, but the way it had felt. The specific experience of being managed by someone who appeared from the outside to be doing very little. The peculiar helplessness of being entirely outclassed in an arena he had believed was his. He had been outclassed before. Everyone had. You couldn't make it through Ranger School without being outclassed by someone at some point. But it had always felt like a gap in ability. Someone faster, someone stronger, someone more technically precise. It had always felt like the difference between two versions of the same kind of thing. This had felt different. This had felt like the difference between two different kinds of thing entirely. Like he had been playing one game while she was playing another game that looked the same from the outside, but operated on entirely different principles. He didn't have language for it yet. He didn't have language for a lot of what had happened this morning. But he had one thing. He had the crack. The crack in the story he'd been telling himself. The hairline fracture in 27 years of a narrative that had never been seriously tested. He sat with it. I didn't know what it would eventually become. He didn't know that the crack would widen slowly over the following days and weeks, until the original story couldn't hold its shape anymore, and something else would have to be built in its place. He didn't know that what would be built in its place would be better. He just sat with the crack. And for the first time in his career, Ryan Mitchell didn't know what came next, which was, though, he didn't know it yet, exactly where he needed to be. The knife was still in the dirt when Ryan walked away. He didn't look back. That was the thing about Ryan Mitchell. He never looked back after a moment like that, because looking back meant acknowledging that something behind you might matter. He had thrown the knife, made his statement, turned to the crowd, and gotten nothing but silence in return. He had interpreted that silence as agreement, as validation, as 30 soldiers recognizing the truth of what he had said and choosing not to argue with it. He was wrong about the silence. I was wrong about almost everything he believed in the 60 seconds following that moment. But the silence was the most important mistake, because the silence wasn't agreement. The silence was 30 people holding their breath, watching Claire Dawson reach down, pick up the knife from the dirt, and tuck it into her belt with the same unhurried motion she used for everything else, and waiting to see what happened next. What happened next was nothing. That was the part nobody expected. She didn't shout. She didn't report him. She didn't walk off the yard or go looking for an instructor or do any of the things that a person does when they have been publicly humiliated and need the institution to step in and restore order on their behalf. She just picked up the knife, looked at the space where Ryan had been standing for one quiet second, and then sat back down on the bench and went back to cleaning the blade. That was when the silence changed texture. It stopped being held breath and became something else entirely. Something closer to the specific unease of watching a situation and realizing you have completely misread what kind of situation it is. Master Sergeant David Okafor was standing at the edge of the yard when it happened. He had seen Ryan grab the knife. He had heard the words. He had watched the blade hit the dirt. He had made no move to intervene, which had confused the 4 candidates standing nearest to him, 2 of whom had glanced in his direction expecting some signal, stop this handle, this has gone too far, and gotten nothing back. Now those same candidates looked at him again. Okafor was watching Claire. His expression was not the expression of a man observing something he needed to manage. It was the expression of a man watching something he had been waiting to see, the way a person watches the first real weather of a season change, knowing it was coming, still absorbing the reality of its arrival. He said nothing. He turned and walked back toward the main building. The four candidates near him exchanged looks. "What was that?" one of them said quietly. A 26-year-old former Marine Raider named Specialist Corey Baines, who had been at Blackridge for 6 days and had already learned that the things Okafor didn't say were usually more important than the things he did. "I don't know," the person next to him said. "He didn't stop it." No. Why didn't he stop it? Nobody answered that question. Ryan was across the yard laughing about something with two candidates who had been standing near him during the demonstration, playing out the debrief version of what had just happened. The version where he was the protagonist, where the knife in the dirt was a reasonable response to an absurd situation, where Claire Dawson was a footnote. He was good at building those versions quickly. He had a lot of practice. But three candidates had drifted closer to the bench where Claire was sitting. Not close enough to be obvious. Close enough to be within earshot. One of them was a 29-year-old from Tennessee named Lieutenant Marcus Webb, who had 2 tours in Afghanistan behind him, and who had been watching Claire Dawson since the first morning, not because he had decided anything about her, but because something about the way she moved made him feel like he was missing information he needed. "You okay?" Marcus said. Claire didn't look up from the blade. "Yes." That was, he searched for the word. "Unnecessary," she said. "Yes." "He's not usually like that," Marcus said, which was not entirely true but felt true in the moment because he needed it to be. "He's exactly like that," Claire said, not with anger, with the kind of plain, factual delivery that made Marcus feel oddly accountable though he hadn't done anything. "He's like that all the time. You've just decided not to notice it." Marcus opened his mouth, closed it. I've seen him push people, but he pushed the knife into the bench 2 inches from my hand," Claire said. "That's not pushing people. That's something else." She finally looked up. "I'm not interested in discussing whether it was within the expected range of his behavior. I'm just answering your question." "I'm okay." Marcus nodded slowly. "Okay. Thank you for asking," she said, and she meant it. That was the thing about Claire Dawson that Marcus would think about later, much later, when he was trying to explain to someone what she had been like in those first few days she was never performing. When she thanked someone, she meant it. When she said something was unnecessary, she meant it. There was no layer of performance over the communication, no social management, no gap between what she felt and what she said. It was disorienting because everyone at Blackridge had learned to operate with multiple layers. What you show, what you think, what you actually intend. And here was someone who appeared to only have one. He couldn't decide if that made her strong or vulnerable. By afternoon, briefing the yard incident had circulated through the entire candidate pool. Ryan knew it had circulated. He could feel it in the way conversations adjusted when he entered a room. Not the usual adjustment where the room reorganized around him, but a different kind, more careful, slightly off angle from what he expected. He told himself it was respect. He was very good at telling himself things. The afternoon session was a tactical problem-solving exercise. Map-based 3 teams competing solutions presented to a panel of instructors. Ryan's team had him at the center of it, as usual. He drove the planning discussion, synthesized the inputs, presented the solution. It was good work. He knew it was good work. The instructor's feedback was positive. But during the second team's presentation, something happened that Ryan noticed without being able to name. The second team included Claire Dawson. She had not been the one to present. A tall candidate from Oregon named Lieutenant Diane Shu had done most of the talking. But at one point, Shu had stopped mid-explanation and looked at Claire, and Claire had said something quiet, 3 or 4 words, not more. And Shu had nodded and changed the direction of the entire explanation, and the solution had come together differently than it had been coming together before. The instructors had asked 3 follow-up questions. Shu had answered 2 of them by essentially restating what Claire had said to her 30 seconds earlier. Nobody else in the room appeared to register this sequence of events. Ryan registered it. He wasn't sure what to do with the registration. After the briefing, Master Sergeant Okafor asked Ryan to stay behind. The room emptied. Ryan stood near the back wall, Okafor sat on the edge of a table the way he always did, not behind it, not at the authority position, but perched on the edge, with his arms crossed like someone who was choosing to make themselves equal to you in physical space, because they wanted your full attention on what they were about to say. You want to tell me what happened this morning, Okafor said. Training yard disagreement, Ryan said. He had the words ready. He'd been carrying them since the morning. That what you're calling it? That's what it was. Okafor looked at him for a long moment. You put a blade into wood 6 inches from someone's hand. 2 inches, Ryan said, and then immediately wished he hadn't said it because the precision made it worse. 2 inches, Okafor repeated. He didn't change his expression. You want to explain the reasoning on that? Ryan's jaw was tight. I was making a point. What point? That presence matters, that you have to assert yourself in a program like this or you get lost. And grabbing someone else's equipment and driving a blade into a bench was the way you chose to demonstrate that. Ryan said nothing. Let me ask you something different, Okafor said. He unfolded his arms and put both hands flat on the table behind him. You were watching the afternoon session. Yes. Did you catch what happened with Team 2's presentation? Ryan paused. What about it? Answer the question. Chu's explanation changed halfway through, became cleaner. The solution held together better. Why, Dawson said something to her. Okafor nodded. Dawson said 4 words that completely reoriented a tactical presentation that had been building in the wrong direction for 12 minutes. 4 words that 3 experienced instructors then built their follow-up questions around. He paused. You catch all that? Yes, Ryan said quietly. And this morning you threw her knife in the dirt. The sentence landed like a stone in still water. Ryan kept his face controlled. I didn't know. You didn't know, Okafor said, not repeating it as agreement, repeating it as the specific thing he wanted Ryan to sit with. You didn't know because you didn't ask, because you looked at someone sitting quietly on a bench and decided you already had all the information you needed. He stood up. That's the problem, Mitchell. Not the knife, not the bench. The decision you made before any of that happened. The decision that you could read a person and know everything about them from what they were showing you. Ryan stared at the floor for a moment. Who is she? He asked. Okafor walked toward the door. Ask her yourself, he said. And this time before you open your mouth, spend 30 seconds deciding what you actually want to know. He left. Ryan stood alone in the empty briefing room for almost 4 minutes without moving. That night, the candidate barracks had the particular charged atmosphere of a contained storm, everyone present, everyone aware of the pressure, nobody quite ready to name it out loud. Ryan was on his bunk. He wasn't sleeping. He was looking at the ceiling, with his arms behind his head, running the day back through his mind, the way he always processed difficult field experiences, systematically trying to extract the lessons from the noise. The problem was that tonight the noise kept reassembling into the same picture. No matter what order he ran it in, he had acted on incomplete information. He had made a decision about Claire Dawson based entirely on what she wasn't doing rather than what she was. He had looked at her quiet and read it as emptiness, and the quiet had turned out to be something else entirely, something closer to fullness, to a person who had so much already settled inside them that they didn't need to reach outward for acknowledgement. He had thrown her knife in the dirt. He had said in front of 30 people that women didn't belong. He had been wrong about the knife, and probably wrong about the rest of it too, and the being wrong didn't bother him as much as the mechanism of it, the fact that he had been so certain. That the certainty had never even flickered. That he had walked across that yard with complete confidence in a conclusion he had reached without any actual evidence. Marcus Webb dropped onto the bunk next to him around 2100 hours. Marcus didn't say anything at first. He lay there with his hands on his stomach, staring upward. Then he said, I talked to her this morning. Ryan said, I know. She said you're exactly like that all the time, that we just don't notice. Ryan was quiet. Is she right? Marcus asked. Probably, Ryan said. Marcus absorbed that. She didn't seem angry. That's what got me. After what you did, she didn't seem angry at all. I noticed that. What does that mean? That she's checked out? That she doesn't care? Ryan thought about the gray eyes, the stillness in them, the way she had looked at him when he asked how she had read his every move, the patience in the answer, the complete absence of anything that wanted something from him in return. I don't think it means either of those things, Ryan said. Marcus turned his head to look at him. Then what? Ryan didn't answer right away. He was working through something. When you've already proven yourself, Ryan finally said slowly, in situations that make this one look small, you don't need the reaction. The anger, the defense, the need to make someone else feel what they made you feel. That whole mechanism stops mattering because you already know what you are. He paused. She already knows what she is. Marcus stared at him. That's either the most self-aware thing you've ever said, Marcus said, or you're in worse shape than I thought. Both probably, Ryan said. The lights went out at 2200. Ryan lay in the dark and did not sleep for a long time. The next morning changed everything. It started at 0530 during the first full assessment session, a combat problem-solving exercise designed to create genuine pressure. Not simulated pressure, but the real cognitive strain that comes from time constraints, incomplete information, and the specific kind of chaos that feels personal, because the consequences of getting it wrong are visible immediately in your team's performance. The candidates were divided into 4 groups. Ryan was assigned as group leader. Claire was in a different group 3, led by a 30-year-old from Colorado named Captain Steve Harlan, who was technically excellent and extremely organized, and who had in Ryan's private assessment exactly the kind of mind that performed beautifully in structured environments and would struggle the moment the structure broke. The exercise began. Ryan's group moved well in the first phase. His planning was solid. His communication was clear. He knew how to run a team through an established procedure, and for 23 minutes, the exercise looked like exactly what he expected it to look like. Then the scenario changed. The instructors introduced a second phase complication, a variable that invalidated the primary approach, a thing that was designed to simulate the particular awfulness of having a good plan collapse in the middle of execution. 2 of Ryan's team members wanted to rebuild from the original framework. One wanted to abandon the framework entirely. Ryan was trying to hold the 3 perspectives together while simultaneously running new calculations on what the complication actually meant for their objectives. I'm on a decision. It was a reasonable decision, technically sound, defensible under the original problem parameters. It was also wrong, not because the decision itself was bad in isolation, but because it was based on the original problem parameters, which had just changed, and Ryan had processed the change intellectually but not operationally. His plan acknowledged the new variable, but didn't actually incorporate it the way a person acknowledges rain while continuing to plan a picnic. His team executed this decision. It failed at the 2/3 mark. Not catastrophically, but clearly, measurably, visibly wrong. Ryan stood in the space where the failure had occurred and felt the specific cold clarity of knowing he had made a mistake he could have avoided, and also knowing that the avoidance would have required him to do something he hadn't done, which was to stop planning from the original framework the moment the framework was invalidated. He had held on to the structure because he was good at the structure. He had held on to it the way he held on to things he was good at, with the same certainty he had carried to the equipment bench yesterday morning. He heard Group 3 finish. He turned. Claire's group had completed the exercise. Steve Harlan was delivering the debrief to the instructors, organized, clear, structured, and Ryan could see as he listened that the solution was genuinely good. It had accounted for the complication. It had rebuilt in real time. It had produced a result that was cleaner than what his group had attempted. He walked over after the debrief while the instructors were reviewing notes. Harlan was talking to 2 of his group members. Claire was standing slightly apart reviewing something she had written on a note card. Ryan stopped in front of her. She looked up. Your group solved it, he said. Yes, she said. How did you handle the second phase change? She held his gaze for a moment. Harlan's initial response was to rebuild around the original structure. I told him the structure was the problem, that we needed to treat the complication as the new baseline, not as an obstacle to the old baseline. He listened to you. After about 45 seconds, she said, he's a good leader. Good leaders update when they get better information. Ryan felt that sentence in a specific place. Is that what you think I did wrong yesterday? He asked. He meant the exercise. He wasn't entirely sure that's what he meant. Claire looked at him steadily. Yesterday on the mat or yesterday in the yard? Both, he said. She was quiet for a moment. In the yard, you made a decision before you had any information, she said. On the mat, you had information and didn't update your approach when it stopped working. She paused. They're different failures, but they come from the same place. You trust what you're carrying so much that incoming data doesn't really change anything. Ryan's throat was tight. I owe you an apology, he said. It was hard to say. He didn't have a lot of practice saying it, not because he was cruel, but because he had historically managed to avoid situations that required it either by being right or by not looking closely enough to see where he was wrong. Claire held his gaze. Yes, she said, you do. She didn't release him from it with grace or comfort or the social softening that people usually offered when someone apologized, because that softening was actually about the apologizer's discomfort, not the wrong person's restoration. She just held it. Let it be the real weight it was. I'm sorry, Ryan said. What I did with the knife, that was wrong. All of it. She was quiet for another moment. I know you mean that right now, she said finally. What I'm interested in is whether you'll still mean it in 3 days when the program gets harder and old habits start pulling. I'll mean it, he said. We'll see, she said. It wasn't a dismissal. It was something more demanding than acceptance. It was a standard set in front of him, a bar that only the future could determine whether he would meet. He nodded. He started to turn away. Mitchell, she said. He turned back. What Okafor said to you last night, she said. Ryan went still. How do you know what Okafor said to me? I don't, she said. I'm guessing because I know David Okafor, and I know what he says when he's trying to help someone see something they're not seeing. She paused. Whatever he said, he meant it as a gift, not a punishment. Treat it like one. Ryan stared at her. You know Okafor? Yes. From before? Yes. He wanted to ask from where, from how long ago, from what kind of situation. But something in her tone and something newer in himself that was still very tender and very new told him that this was not the moment to ask, that asking right now would be about his need for information and not about the right time for the information to arrive. Okay, he said. He walked away. It was the first time in his life that he had walked away from a conversation with questions he had chosen not to ask, and the experience was strange, uncomfortable, but not the way he expected. Not the discomfort of missing something, the discomfort of restraint, of choosing a different relationship to his own curiosity. He didn't know yet what to call that. He would learn eventually. That afternoon, during a 45-minute break between sessions, Ryan did something he had never done before at Blackridge. He sat down next to Claire Dawson and said absolutely nothing. He just sat. The bench, the same bench she was reviewing her note card. He was looking at the middle distance. Neither of them initiated conversation. The silence between them was not the silence of avoidance. It was something else, a shared suspension, two people occupying the same space with nothing expected from either direction. After about 12 minutes, Claire said without looking up from the note card, the second session this afternoon is going to use a degraded communication protocol. Radios will cut in and out. The point is to see how teams operate when they can't rely on the infrastructure. Ryan looked at her. How do you know that? She finally glanced sideways at him. Because that's what comes after a morning session that tested structure. The afternoon session tests what's underneath the structure. That's not in the brief. No, she said. He thought about asking again how she knew. He thought about the choice he'd made this morning. What's the most important thing to do when communication degrades? He asked instead. Claire set the note card on her knee. Trust the people you are with, she said. You've already briefed the plan. They know the objective. When the radio cuts out, your instinct is going to be to reestablish communication because you need to control the information flow. Oh, but you can't always control it. So the real skill is building a team that can hold the objective even when the channel is silent. She paused. Trust is the infrastructure that replaces the radio. Ryan sat with that for a moment. You've been in situations where the radio was silent, he said. Not a question. Yes, she said. Long ones. She looked at him. Something shifted in her eyes, not opening exactly, more like a door, staying closed, but allowing him to see briefly that there was something behind it. Long ones, she confirmed. He nodded slowly. I'll keep that in mind this afternoon, he said. She went back to the note card. He stayed on the bench. The afternoon session was exactly what she had described. Degraded communications, broken protocol, a scenario that fell apart in the middle and demanded that teams operate from relationship and shared understanding rather than from instruction. Ryan's team lost the radio connection at the 11-minute mark. The old Ryan would have spent 90 seconds trying to reestablish. He spent 0. He looked at his team. He pointed to each person, made brief eye contact, held up 2 fingers indicating the secondary objective, and moved. They moved with him. They didn't need the radio. They had the trust. They completed the exercise with the 3rd highest score of the afternoon. Not first, not perfect, but complete and clean, and built on something real rather than something borrowed from a framework that had stopped working 8 minutes in. When the instructors gave feedback, the lead evaluator, a colonel who Ryan had rarely heard speak in 3 days at Blackridge, said something he hadn't expected. Group 2 adapted well to communications failure. Strong relational cohesion. That's the piece most groups try to build in the plan and then discover the plan can't hold it. She paused. Whatever you learned between this morning and this afternoon, you learned the right thing. Ryan didn't look at Claire. He didn't have to. He could feel without looking that she was paying attention to something else entirely, some other aspect of the debrief, completely uninterested in being credited for anything, which was he was beginning to understand entirely the point. That evening, Okafor found Ryan on the track. He fell into stride next to him without preamble, the way Okafor did everything without announcement, without fanfare, just present. "Better afternoon," Okafor said. "Yes," Ryan said. "What changed?" Ryan ran 4 strides in silence. "Someone told me trust is the infrastructure that replaces the radio." Okafor said nothing for a moment. "She said that to you?" Okafor said finally. "Yes." "Good." Okafor ran beside him. "She doesn't say things like that to people she hasn't decided are worth saying them to." Ryan looked at him sideways. "What does that mean?" "It means you made an impression," Okafor said. "Not the one you intended this morning, the one you made after." They ran in silence for a while. "Okafor," Ryan said. "Yeah. When you didn't stop what happened in the yard this morning, the knife, what I said, was that intentional?" Okafor kept running. After a long pause, he said, "What do you think Ryan thought about it?" "I think you were watching to see what she would do," Ryan said slowly. "Not what I would do. You already knew what I would do. You were watching to see how she would respond to it and whether the response would tell you something about where she is right now." Okafor said nothing, which was its own kind of answer. "She passed," Ryan said. "She always passes," Okafor said quietly. Something in the way he said it, the weight in it, the history in it, made Ryan want to ask the question he had been holding since the yard. "Who is she?" he asked. "Really?" Okafor ran in silence for another 50 meters. Then he said, "She's the reason this program exists." Ryan slowed. Okafor kept running. Ryan stopped entirely, standing on the track, with his hands at his sides, watching Okafor move away from him in the failing light. And the sentence sat in the air where Okafor had left it. "She's the reason this program exists." He stood there for a long time. The track was empty. The light was going. The sounds of Blackridge at end of day moved around him, distant conversations, equipment, being stowed, the particular quality of a military installation, settling into evening. Ryan Mitchell stood in the middle of the track and felt for the second time in 2 days the story he had been telling himself about the world develop another crack. Bigger than the first one, more fundamental. He had walked into Blackridge believing he understood what kind of place it was, what kind of people were in it, what kind of program he was entering, and why it existed. He had been wrong about at least one thing. The woman he had thrown a knife in front of that morning was not a candidate. She had never been a candidate. She was something else entirely. And everything, the bench, the silence, the stillness, the way the instructors looked at her, the 4 words she had said that redirected an entire tactical presentation, the way she had taken him apart on the mat without breaking a sweat, the things she had said him that felt less like conversation and more like precise surgical corrections, all of it reorganized in his mind at once into a picture that was completely different from the one he had been looking at. He started walking, not back to the barracks, toward the east building where the senior staff offices were, where he was going to knock on a door and ask a question he should have asked on the first day. Not who is she, not what is her background, the real question, the one underneath all the others. Why did they send her here now, and what is she looking for? The east building had 3 lights on when Ryan got there. He stood outside for a moment, not because he was losing his nerve, but because he was making sure he had the right question. Okafor's words had rearranged something fundamental in how he understood the last 2 days, and he had learned enough in the last 48 hours to know that walking into a conversation with the wrong question was worse than walking in with no question at all. She's the reason this program exists. He knocked. Colonel James Walker opened the door himself. That was the first thing that surprised Ryan. No aid, no delay. Just Walker, 61 years old, 34 years in uniform, the kind of man whose face had stopped being readable sometime around his third decade of service. He looked at Ryan the way he looked at everything, with a calm, flat attention that didn't indicate surprise or welcome or anything in between. Mitchell, Walker said. Sir, I have a question. I know you do, Walker said. Come in. That was the second thing that surprised him. Not come back tomorrow. Not this can wait until morning. Come in. As if Walker had been expecting this exact knock at this exact hour. Ryan followed him inside. Walker sat behind his desk, but pushed a chair around to the front of it before sitting, so that when Ryan sat down, there was no desk between them. Just two people in two chairs in a quiet room with a single lamp on. Okafor told you something tonight, Walker said. Yes, sir. And now you want the rest of it? Yes, sir. Walker leaned back. He looked at the ceiling for a moment, the way a person does when they're deciding not how to say something, but where to start saying it. What do you know about the assessment program's history? Walker asked. 11 years, produced strong operators, 72% retention rate post-program, which is significantly above average for. That's the official version, Walker said, the one in the brief. Ryan stopped. The real version, Walker said, starts about 14 years ago, before the program existed, when we had a very significant problem and a very specific person who identified it, documented it, and then spent 3 years trying to get anyone with institutional authority to listen to her. Ryan went still. The problem, Walker continued, was selection bias. We were building special operations teams that were technically excellent and tactically rigid. Soldiers who could execute a plan with extraordinary precision and collapse completely when the plan stopped working. We were selecting for confidence and filtering out adaptability without knowing we were doing it. Our attrition in non-standard scenario situations that fell outside the training parameters was significantly higher than it should have been. How significantly? Ryan asked. Walker looked at him. Significantly enough that people died who shouldn't have. The room was very quiet. She identified this, Ryan said, not a question. She documented it across 14 months, Walker said. 3 theaters, 41 operational scenarios. She built a statistical case that was frankly irrefutable, and she brought it to her chain of command. And her chain of command told her she was overanalyzing historical outcomes and needed to focus on her current assignment. Ryan felt something cold move through his chest. They ignored her, he said. They dismissed her, Walker said. There's a difference. Ignoring suggests they didn't engage with the work. They engaged with it. They read it, they discussed it, and then they decided that the conclusions were inconvenient for the existing model, and the person presenting them was junior enough that inconvenient could be managed. He paused. She was a captain at the time, 31 years old, one of the most decorated operators of her generation, with a service record that was partly classified and partly so far outside the conventional that her evaluators didn't fully understand what they were reading. Ryan thought about the mat, about her moving inside his attack window before he'd completed the commitment, about 4 words that had redirected an entire tactical presentation. What happened? Ryan asked. She went up the chain, Walker said, 3 levels up, submitted the documentation formally, filed a supplemental report when the first one was buried. And when that was buried too, she did something that took more courage than anything I've seen on an operational deployment. He looked directly at Ryan. She went to the Inspector General. The weight of that landed fully. Going to the IG was not a small thing. In a culture that ran on internal loyalty, on the understanding that problems were managed inside the family, on the unspoken compact, that you did not put institutional failures in front of an external review process, going to the Inspector General was the kind of move that ended careers, not through official punishment, through the slow, invisible, entirely deniable process of being frozen out, passed over for assignments, excluded from conversations, quietly moved to the margins of a world that no longer considered you one of its own. They froze her out, Ryan said. They tried, Walker said. She had enough operational credibility, enough people who had served with her and trusted her that the freeze wasn't complete. But it was significant, and it happened while the IG review was ongoing, which meant she spent 14 months in a kind of professional purgatory, her findings being investigated at one level while she was being managed out at another. What did the IG find? Ryan asked. Walker looked at him for a moment. The IG found that her documentation was accurate, her methodology was sound, and her conclusions were supported by the operational record, Walker said. They also found that her reports had been deliberately deprioritized at two separate levels in the chain, which is a polite way of saying buried. There was a formal finding. There were administrative consequences for two senior officers. He paused. And then the program was created. Ryan sat with that for a long moment. She built this program, he said. She designed the selection criteria, Walker said, the adaptive problem-solving framework, the communications degradation protocols, the second phase complication model you experience today. The entire architecture of what this program actually tests for, she created it. From the documentation, from 14 months of watching operators fail in ways they didn't have to fail. He leaned forward slightly. And then when it was built, they gave it to someone else to run because they had determined that she had too much history with the institution to be an objective evaluator. The cold thing in Ryan's chest spread. They built the program from her work, he said slowly, and then told her she couldn't be part of it. Correct. How long ago? 8 years, Walker said. So why is she here now? Ryan asked. Walker looked at him steadily. Because the program is drifting, he said. Not dramatically, not in ways that show up in the official metrics yet, but in ways that someone with her specific eye can see the same drift she documented 14 years ago, beginning to reestablish itself inside the framework she built to prevent it. He paused. She requested re-entry for this cohort as an observer and evaluator. They said yes, Ryan said. I said yes, Walker said. There are people in the chain above me who don't know she's here or who know and have chosen not to officially acknowledge it, which is its own kind of statement about how far we've actually come. His voice was flat and careful. She is here on my authority and my authority alone, and she is not an observer. Ryan frowned. You said? I said she requested re-entry as an observer and evaluator, Walker said. I said yes. What I didn't tell you is what I actually asked her to do. He looked directly at Ryan. I asked her to identify the candidates in this cohort who have the potential to change how this program operates long-term. Not the best performers, not the highest scorers, the ones with the capacity to look at the institution from the inside and make it better. The ones who can learn what she learned without having to spend a decade getting buried to learn it. Ryan was very still. And, he said, Walker said nothing. The silence was the answer. Ryan felt the floor of the conversation shift under him in a way he hadn't been prepared for, even after everything that had already shifted in the last 2 days. She's evaluating us, Ryan said. Not the program, us, specifically. She's been evaluating since day one, Walker said. Every interaction, every response, every moment where something unexpected happened and a person had to decide who they were going to be, he paused. Including this morning. Ryan's jaw tightened. She let me humiliate her in front of 30 people because she was evaluating my response. No, Walker said, and his voice shifted slightly. Became harder at the edge, the way a voice does when it's correcting something that matters. She didn't let anything happen. What happened this morning happened because you chose to make it happen. She didn't engineer your behavior, Mitchell. She simply didn't prevent it, because preventing it would have told her less about you than watching it unfold. He held Ryan's gaze. And what happened after the apology, the afternoon session, the conversation on the track, you showing up here tonight, instead of going to bed, that's the evaluation. All of it. Ryan sat in the chair in Colonel Walker's office and felt with a clarity that was almost physical. The entirety of the last 2 days reorganized itself into a single coherent picture. The bench, the knife, the mat, the briefing room, the degraded communications exercise. The bench again, the track. This room, every one of it observed, every one of it data. She's been doing this for 2 days, and she already knows more about every person in this cohort than 6 months of standard assessment would produce, Ryan said. Yes, Walker said simply, because she creates situations. She doesn't create situations, Walker said. She identifies them. There's a difference. She doesn't manufacture pressure. She locates the pressure that already exists and watches what people do when it applies. He paused. The situations you've been in for the last 48 hours were all real. The knife in the yard this morning was real. The feeling of being managed on the mat was real. She didn't construct any of that. She just didn't remove herself from it. Ryan was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "She knew I was going to do it." "She identified the probability," Walker said. "How?" "Because she read your file," Walker said. "And she read 3 other people's files. And she is very, very good at understanding the gap between what a record says about a person and what a person actually is. And what your record says, Mitchell, underneath the commendations and the schools and the performance ratings is that you have never been seriously wrong about yourself in an environment that mattered." He paused. "And she wanted to see what happened when you were." The lamp in the corner of the room cast a particular quality of light, warm and limited, the kind that makes a room feel like the only room that exists. Ryan sat in it and breathed. "What does she think?" he asked, "about what she's seen so far?" Walker almost smiled. It was a very small movement, barely visible. "She doesn't tell me what she thinks until she's ready to tell me. That's how she works. I don't ask and she doesn't offer. And at the end of the evaluation period, she gives me a report that is the most accurate human document I have ever read about a group of people." He looked at Ryan. "I've been working with her for 11 years. I have never once predicted what the report would say." Ryan stood up. "I didn't know exactly why." His body just made the decision that the conversation was over, and he trusted his body on that one. "Thank you, sir," he said. "Mitchell," Walker said. He turned. "What you did this morning in the yard, I want you to understand something. She has been dismissed, sidelined, buried, and managed out by people with significantly more institutional authority than a 27-year-old recruit. She has survived all of it. What you did this morning was not the worst thing that has been done to her in a professional context." He paused. "But it was done in front of 30 people who are all going to be officers. And the way those 30 people respond to what they witnessed matters as much as the way you do. Remember that." Ryan nodded once. He walked out. The night air was cold in the way October nights in Virginia are cold, decisively without apology, in a way that makes everything very clear. He went back to the barracks and did not go to sleep. At 0300, he was still awake when his bunk neighbor Marcus Webb sat up and said into the darkness, "You find out anything?" "Yes," Ryan said. A pause. "You gonna tell me?" Marcus asked. Ryan thought about it. "Not tonight," he said. "Tomorrow. After you've had some sleep and I've had some time to figure out how to say it." Marcus lay back down. "That bad?" "Not bad," Ryan said. "Big." Marcus was quiet. "KP on," he said finally. "The next morning arrived with the particular cruelty of mornings that follow nights. You don't sleep through too bright too early. The world moving at a speed that feels personally aggressive." Ryan was on the track at 0500, not running, standing, looking at the east building. He heard footsteps on the gravel behind him at 0512. He didn't turn around. He knew the footsteps. Claire came to stand next to him. Not close. The appropriate distance of 2 people who are not yet comfortable and know it. "You talked to Walker," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," Ryan said. She was quiet. "Are you angry?" he asked. She thought about it. "No." "You should probably be angry." "Probably," she said. "I've been angry. It's very expensive and it doesn't change the data." Ryan turned to look at her. In the early morning half-light, she looked different than she did in the yard. Not softer exactly, but more three-dimensional. More like a complete person and less like the thing he had been trying to categorize since the first morning. 14 years, he said. She looked at the track. "That's a long time to be right and get nowhere," he said. "You get somewhere," she said. "Just not where you expected." She paused. "The people who buried the reports, 2 of them are retired now. One of them came to me 4 years ago, said he wanted to apologize." She paused again. "He cried. Grown man, 30 years of service, sitting in a chair crying because he had been wrong and people had died because of it, and he had spent 8 years knowing both things." "What did you say to him?" "I said I appreciated him coming." She looked at Ryan. "Then I asked him whether any of the junior officers who had served under him during that period had learned to speak up when they saw something wrong. And he said he didn't know. And I said that was the part that mattered most now." Ryan absorbed that. "You're not interested in apologies," he said. "I'm interested in what the apology produces," she said. "An apology without a behavior change is just a statement about someone's feelings. I'm not in the business of managing people's feelings about the past." Her voice was matter of fact, not unkind. "I'm in the business of changing what happens next." Ryan looked at her. "Is that what this is?" he said. "This cohort. Us." "Yes," she said simply. Walker said, "You're looking for people who can change the program from inside. I'm looking for people who have the capacity to see the institution clearly enough to improve it," she said. "Not tear it down, not perform revolution. Improve it. That requires a specific combination, enough loyalty to stay inside, enough clarity to see what's wrong, enough courage to say it out loud when saying it out loud costs something." She looked at him. "Most people have one or two of those things. Having all three is rare." Ryan was quiet. "What does the drift look like?" he asked. "The one you came back to find." She looked at the track. "The same thing it always looks like," she said. "The program selects for performance. Performance becomes the standard. The standard becomes the thing people optimize for, rather than the thing the standard was built to measure. Candidates learn what gets them scored well, and they deliver that. And the underlying capacity, the adaptability, the judgment under genuine uncertainty, the ability to be wrong and recover without losing the thread, that capacity stops being tested because the testing is too expensive and the metrics don't capture it cleanly." "Yesterday's communications exercise," Ryan said. "That was you." "The scenario design, yes," she said. "I introduced the degradation variable this week because I needed to see something specific." "What?" "Whether anyone would do what you did," she said. "Drop the radio and move on instinct and trust." She paused. "You were the only group leader who didn't spend time trying to reestablish contact." Ryan felt the weight of that. "Why did you tell me it was coming?" he asked. "Yesterday afternoon, you warned me." Claire was quiet for a moment. "I told you the concept," she said. "Not the specific scenario. I told you that trust is the infrastructure that replaces the radio. Whether you use that information or not was your choice." She looked at him. "You used it. That told me something." "What?" "That you can update," she said, "in real time, under pressure, based on information you just received from someone you had every reason not to trust yet." She paused. "That's very hard. Most people can't do it at all. Most people take input that challenges their existing framework and find reasons to discount it because the framework feels like safety. You didn't do that." Ryan thought about Marcus asking him why he'd walked away from conversations on his terms last night, about choosing not to ask questions he wanted answers to because it wasn't the right moment, about the restraint that had felt like a new muscle sore from first use. "I'm learning," he said. "Yes," she said. "That's exactly what you're doing." They stood in silence for a moment. Then Ryan said, "The others in the cohort, are there others you're watching the way you're watching me?" Claire was quiet for a beat. "Yes," she said. "Who?" "That's not information I share," she said. "Fair," he said. Another silence. "Dawson," he said. "Yes." "The two senior officers who buried your reports," he said. "What happened to them?" Walker said, "Administrative consequences." Her jaw shifted slightly. "One received a formal reprimand. One was passed over for promotion once and then promoted the following cycle because the people above him decided the reprimand had been sufficient consequence and didn't want to lose the operational value." She paused. "He retired at full rank. He has a house in North Carolina." Ryan's hands were very still at his sides. "That doesn't make you angry," he said. "Of course it makes me angry," she said, and it was the first time in 3 days he had heard anything in her voice that felt like heat. "It makes me furious. It has always made me furious. I am not a person who doesn't feel things, Mitchell. I am a person who has learned to not let my feelings determine what I do next." She looked at him directly. "There's a significant difference. Don't confuse stillness with absence." He nodded. "I won't." "Good," she said. She turned to go. "Dawson," he said. Again she stopped. "The program," he said, "the one built from your work, does it do what you designed it to do?" She considered the question seriously, the way she considered everything. "When it's run correctly," she said, "yes. When it drifts, no. That's why I came back." She paused. "And it was built on the evidence of people who died in the field because nobody listened. Every part of it, every scenario, every protocol, every assessment criterion has a human cost underneath it. I carry that. I will always carry that." Her voice was level. "But I would rather carry it building something that prevents more of it than carry it doing nothing." She walked away. Ryan watched her go. He stood on the track for another few minutes. Then he went to find Marcus. Marcus was in the mess with a cup of coffee and the expression of a man who had also not slept well, which made sense because the barracks wasn't large, and Ryan's particular brand of wakeful silence was not quiet. Ryan sat across from him. "Tell me," Marcus said. Ryan told him. Not all of it, not Walker's office, not the classified operational history, not the things that weren't his to share, but the shape of it, the framework, the fact that the program existed because someone had documented a systemic failure at significant personal cost and had been right and gotten buried for being right and had come back anyway. Marcus listened without interrupting, which was unusual for Marcus. When Ryan finished, Marcus sat with his coffee for a long time. "She designed the whole thing," Marcus said. "Yes. And they gave it to someone else to run." "Yes." Marcus looked at his coffee. "And she came back anyway." "Yes." "Why?" Marcus said, not cynically, genuinely. "Because people are still dying in the field when they don't adapt," Ryan said. "Because the drift is starting again. Because she built it to prevent something specific, and that specific thing is starting to happen again. And she can see it, and she's the only person who knows how to stop it." He paused. "Because apparently that's the kind of person she is." Marcus was quiet. "The knife in the yard," Marcus said slowly. "The mat, all of it. She knew. She identified the probability," Ryan said, using Walker's exact words. "And she let it happen because it told her something about you." "About all of us," Ryan said. 31 people were watching Marcus. She was watching all 31. Marcus set down his coffee. "What are we supposed to do with this?" Marcus said. Ryan thought about everything Claire had said on the track 20 minutes ago. About loyalty and clarity and courage, and the cost of speaking. About the infrastructure of trust. About an apology meaning nothing without the behavior it produces. "We do what we came here to do," Ryan said. "Except now we know what that actually means. We came to become better operators. And she came to find out whether any of us have what it takes to make the institution better." He looked at Marcus. "That's not the same thing as performing well. That's harder. And that's the real program." Marcus absorbed that for a long moment. "She's going to write a report," Marcus said. "At the end, yes. And that report goes to Walker." "Yes. And Walker uses it to," Marcus stopped. "To what change who gets promoted, change the selection criteria, change the program." "I don't know exactly," Ryan said. "But I know that the last time someone wrote a report like that, it took 3 years and a formal IG investigation and 2 buried copies and 1 more attempt before anything changed. And she still came back. So whatever the report does, she believes it matters." Marcus picked up his coffee again, held it without drinking. "That kind of commitment," he said quietly. "That's a different category of person." "Yes," Ryan said. "You think she finds what she's looking for in this cohort?" Ryan thought about the still gray eyes, the knife in the dirt, the way she had looked at him on the track this morning when he asked whether she was angry, and the heat that had moved briefly through her voice when she said, "Of course it makes me angry," before the stillness returned. "I think she's been looking for it for 14 years, Ryan said, "and I think she's close." He finished his coffee, stood up. "We have the scenario assessment in 40 minutes, he said. Marcus nodded. "Ryan," Marcus said. Ryan stopped. "The woman in the yard yesterday," Marcus said. "The one you grabbed the knife from." He paused. "You understand what you actually did now?" "Yes," Ryan said. "And you're going to carry that?" "Yes." "Good," Marcus said. The word had no cruelty in it, only weight. Ryan carried it with him into the 40-minute scenario assessment. He carried it through the problem-solving phase. He carried it into the debrief, where he said for the first time in a program assessment that his team's original approach had been structurally flawed, and he should have recognized it earlier. Not as performance, not as a managed display of humility, as a plain statement of fact delivered in front of peers and instructors and whoever else was in the room, with no attempt to soften it or redirect it or make himself look better inside the admission. The room was quiet after he said it, not the same silence as the mat, a different one. The silence of people recalibrating, of a room adjusting to someone who had changed. He did not look for Claire. He didn't need to. He knew with a certainty that felt nothing like the certainty he had arrived at Blackridge, carrying that she was watching, and that what she was watching was not performance. It was the real thing. And for the first time in his career, the real thing was enough. The silence after Ryan's admission lasted exactly 4 seconds. He counted them without meaning to the way the body tracks significant moments independent of the mind's instructions. 4 seconds of 30 people recalibrating around a single honest statement, and then Okafor said, noted in the flat, economical way, he said everything. And the debrief moved forward, and Ryan sat with the feeling of having done something he couldn't take back. It was different from the feeling of throwing the knife in the dirt. That had been something he couldn't take back either, but the residue it left was corrosive, a burn that spread outward every time he thought about it. This was different. This left something cleaner behind it. Not comfortable, not easy, but clean the way a wound is clean after it's been properly dressed. Marcus caught his eye across the room, said nothing, nodded once. Ryan looked away. The morning's second session was a leadership rotation exercise. Each candidate cycled through a command position during a live scenario, with the rest of the group operating as their team. The design forced every person in the cohort to lead people who were in many cases more experienced than they were in a scenario complex enough that authority alone couldn't carry it. You had to actually know something. You had to actually decide something. And the people you were leading had enough experience to know the difference between a decision and the performance of one. Ryan was assigned the fourth rotation slot, which meant he spent the first three watching. He watched differently than he had 3 days ago. 3 days ago, watching meant cataloging who was performing well, who was struggling, where the gaps were building the social map that told him how to position himself. He had been watching to find his place in the hierarchy. Now he was watching for something else, something he didn't have a clean word for yet, something closer to the way Claire watched, looking for the gap between what people showed and what they were. The first rotation was a 28-year-old from Texas named Lieutenant Priya Ose. She was technically precise, extremely organized, and communicated with the clarity that Ryan had noticed on day one. Under the rotation scenario, she made 3 good decisions in the first 7 minutes and 1 significant error in the 8th when the scenario introduced an unexpected variable, and she held the team at the original objective instead of reassessing. The error cost them 60 seconds and approximately 30% of their margin on the primary task. What Ryan noticed was not the error. What Ryan noticed was what happened in the 2 seconds between the variable arriving and Priya making the wrong call. She had looked at her team. She had seen on at least 2 faces the expression that meant someone had a different read. And she had looked away from those faces and made the call that matched her original plan. She had the information. She had chosen not to take it. Ryan wrote nothing down. He just held it. The second rotation was Steve Harlan from Colorado. Organized, capable, the man whose team, Claire's 4 words, had redirected earlier in the week. Harlan ran the scenario tightly. His error was the opposite of Priya's. He consulted so thoroughly during the variable introduction that the team lost 8 seconds to process, which in a live scenario translated to a different kind of failure. Too much consultation, not enough decision. Ryan held that too. Third rotation was Marcus. Marcus Webb was not the most technically polished candidate in the cohort. He was not the fastest or the most immediately authoritative. What Marcus had, Ryan had always known without quite articulating. It was a quality of genuine attention. When he looked at you, you felt looked at, not assessed, not categorized, but actually seen. And in the rotation scenario, when the variable hit and the team fractured briefly into 3 competing red of what to do next, Marcus didn't try to overpower the fracture. He leaned into it. "Tell me what you're seeing," he said to the 2 people with the competing reads. Each of them gave him 15 seconds. He listened completely. Then he made a call that was neither of their reads exactly, but was built from both of them, and the team moved and they completed the scenario with the highest margin of the morning. After the debrief, Ryan found Marcus. "You did something I haven't seen anyone else do this week," Ryan said. "What?" Marcus said. "You asked the team what they were seeing before you decided. Not in a way that delayed things. In a way that got you better information faster than you could have gotten it alone." Marcus shrugged. Seemed like the obvious move. "It's not obvious," Ryan said. "Most people in command position are too worried about looking uncertain to ask." Marcus looked at him. "Were you worried about that?" Ryan thought about it honestly. 3 days ago, yes, absolutely. And now I'm more worried about making the wrong call for the right-looking reason," Ryan said. "That seems like the worst mistake." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "She did that to you," he said, "not as an accusation, as an observation. She documented 14 months of operators dying, because the institution was making wrong calls for right-looking reasons, Ryan said. That's a different kind of lesson than anything in a manual. His own rotation came at 11:47. The scenario was a resource allocation problem. Under time pressure, 3 simultaneous objectives, insufficient personnel to run all 3 at full capacity. A command decision required about where to concentrate and where to accept risk. It was the kind of problem that had a technically optimal solution and a humanly real version of that solution. And the gap between those two things was where leadership actually lived. Ryan took 4 seconds to read the scenario parameters. He looked at his team, 7 people, all of whom had more operational experience in specific domains than he did, all of whom were watching him with the particular attention of experienced people watching someone make a decision that will affect them. What's the one objective we absolutely cannot fail, he said. A beat of silence. Then Priya Ose, who was on his team for this rotation, said, secondary extraction point. If that fails, everything else is recoverable. If that fails, it isn't. Agreed, Ryan said. Full capacity on secondary, reduced capacity on primary, accepted risk on tertiary. Adjust if the primary degrades past threshold. He looked at each person. Questions, 1 question, 30 seconds to answer it. Then they moved. They completed the scenario. Not with the highest score of the morning. Marcus had that, but they completed it cleanly, and the decision held through 2 additional variable introductions. And when the debrief came, the lead evaluator said the allocation logic was sound and the communication during execution was the strongest she had observed in any rotation. Ryan sat through the feedback and felt something that was not pride exactly, more like recognition. The recognition of doing something correctly that you have done wrong before and knowing the difference from the inside rather than from someone else's evaluation. He looked for Claire in the room. She wasn't there. She hadn't been in the observation section during the rotations. He had noticed her absence midway through Marcus's rotation and had not known what to do with the noticing. She had been present for every session since day 1. Her absence felt significant in a way he couldn't immediately decode. He found out why at 1300. Okafor pulled him aside after the midday break. Not dramatically, not with the energy of something urgent, just a quiet walk with me that Ryan had learned in the past 3 days meant the conversation mattered. They walked the perimeter of the east building. Walker had a call this morning, Okafor said, from someone in the chain above him who became aware that Dawson is here. Ryan went very still. How, Ryan said. Doesn't matter how, Okafor said. What matters is the call happened, and the person on it was not supportive. Who was it? Okafor looked at him sideways. Not your information, Mitchell. Was it one of the officers who buried her reports? Okafor was quiet. That was its own kind of answer. What did Walker say? Ryan asked. Walker said the evaluation is authorized under his command authority and will proceed as planned, Okafor said. The person on the other end of the call said that Dawson's continued presence at Blackridge created an institutional conflict of interest given her history with the IG process, and that her findings in any report she produced would carry a credibility problem because of that history. He paused. They used the word compromised. Ryan stopped walking. They're going to try to kill the report before she writes it, he said. They're going to try to establish grounds to discount it if it reaches someone above Walker, Okafor said. Yes. Ryan's jaw was tight. Where is she right now? Walker's office, Okafor said. And is she? He stopped, started again. How is she handling it? Okafor looked at him with an expression that was as close to fond as Okafor's face probably got. She's handled worse than a phone call, he said. She's been handling worse than this for 14 years. That doesn't answer my question, Ryan said. Okafor was quiet for a moment. She's angry, he said. She's always angry when it happens. She just doesn't let the anger make her stupid. He paused. Go back to the afternoon session. Don't do anything. This is not yours to handle. It's not nobody's to handle, Ryan said. Mitchell, Okafor said, and his voice went to the particular register that meant, this is the last time I'm going to say this pleasantly. Go back to the afternoon session. Ryan went back to the afternoon session. He sat through 90 minutes of advanced tactical problem solving with 30 other candidates in the specific torture of knowing something significant was happening 40 meters away, in a room he was not in and not doing anything about it. He was not good at not doing anything. He had never been good at it. He was getting better. At 15:30, Claire walked into the afternoon session room. She walked in the way she walked everywhere. No announcement, no adjustment of the room's attention. Just present, then present in a different location. She sat in the observation section. She had a note card. She looked the same as she always looked, but Ryan was watching and what he saw was not the same. There was something in the line of her shoulders, not visible to someone who hadn't been watching her for 4 days. A tightness, the specific physical residue of a conversation that had asked more of a person than the person wanted to give. He looked away. He focused on the session. At 1700, after the session concluded and the room was clearing, Ryan did not go to find Claire. He went to the equipment storage area, found the maintenance kit he knew was kept on the third shelf, and spent 20 minutes doing the most methodical cleaning of training equipment he had ever done in his life. Not because the equipment needed it, because he needed 20 minutes of something physical and focus to burn through the afternoon's constrained energy before he trusted himself to be around people again. Priya Osei found him there. She stood in the doorway for a moment. "You're not usually the person who cleans the equipment," she said. "No," he said. "Bad afternoon. Just needed something to do with my hands," he said. She came in and picked up a blade from the rack and started on the one next to his. They cleaned in silence for a few minutes. Then Priya said, "I made the wrong call in my rotation this morning." "Yes," Ryan said. She looked at him. Most people softened a yes like that. He didn't. "I saw two people who had a different red," and she said. "I looked away from them." "Yes," he said again. "Why?" she asked. And she wasn't asking why she had done it. She knew why she had done it. She was asking why, in the larger sense, the sense that wanted an answer from someone she thought might have thought about it. Ryan set down the blade he was cleaning. "Because taking in information that might change your call feels like admitting your call was wrong before you've even made it," he said. "And making the call is the thing you're being evaluated on, so changing it before you make it feels like failing before you start." He paused. "The problem is that the evaluation isn't actually for the call. The evaluation is for what you do with the information you have. Making the right call with limited information is fine. Making the wrong call with available information you chose not to take, that's what costs people in the field." Priya was quiet. "How do you know that?" she asked. "That's not in any manual I've read." "No," he said. "It's not in a manual." She looked at him for a moment. "Dawson," she said. "Yes," he said. Priya set down her blade. "I've been trying to figure out what she is," Priya said. "Since day one. She doesn't fit any category I have. She's not an instructor. She doesn't teach. She's not a candidate. She doesn't compete. She's not a pure observer. She's present in ways that change the room." "She's an architect," Ryan said. "She built the room. She came back to see if it's still standing the way she designed it." Priya absorbed that. "And is it?" Ryan thought about the call from Walker's office, about the word compromised, about the tightness in Claire's shoulders at 15:30. "Parts of it," he said. They finished the cleaning in silence. At 1900, Ryan went to find Claire. Not because Okafor had told him to, not because he had a plan, because 4 days of watching someone carry a very specific kind of weight had produced in him a need to say something that was not about the program, not about the assessment, not about any of the professional architecture that surrounded every interaction they'd had since the bench. He found her on the north side of the building, standing alone with a cup of coffee she wasn't drinking. He stood next to her, said nothing for a moment. "You heard," she said. "Okafor told me," he said. "Not everything, the shape of it." She looked at the cup in her hands. 14 years, Ryan said, "and they still try." "They'll always try," she said. "That's the part I had to make peace with a long time ago." The institution doesn't stop protecting itself just because it's been shown evidence that self-protection is causing damage. People inside the institution protect what they've built, because what they've built is what they are. Admitting the damage means admitting something about themselves. She paused. "Some people can do that. Most can't." "The report," Ryan said, "are they going to be able to kill it?" Claire looked at him sideways. "Are you asking because you're worried about me? Or because you're worried about the program?" "Both," he said, honestly, in that order. Something shifted in her face, very small, gone quickly. "Walker won't let it be buried," she said. "He has enough authority and enough history with the institutional record to make the report's findings part of the official program documentation in a way that can't be quietly removed. He's done it before. She paused. The people who called this morning can challenge its credibility. They can make noise. What they can't do is make it not exist. That's not the same as it changing anything, Ryan said. No, she said, it's not. He looked at her. Does it change anything? He asked. Does it actually change the institution? The report, the findings, the formal documentation, does the institution actually learn? She was quiet for a long time. The coffee in her hands had to be cold by now. The first one didn't, she said finally. The first report, the one I filed 14 years ago, it changed the institutional record. It produced administrative findings. It created this program. She paused. But the people who were already in positions of authority when the first report was filed are still making decisions inside the institution. They incorporated the program. They didn't incorporate the lesson that made the program necessary. She looked at him. That's the drift. That's what I came back to find. And the people who come through the program, Ryan said slowly, the ones who learn what it's actually designed to teach, if they stay in the institution, if they rise in it, then eventually the people making the decisions are people who actually understand what the decisions should be based on, Claire said. Yes, that's the theory. How long does that take? Longer than it should, she said. Less long than it would without the program. She finally drank it from the cup, made a slight face at the temperature, kept drinking anyway. This is why I came back for this cohort specifically. Not because this cohort is special, because the program is at a point where the next generation of its graduates will determine whether the lesson propagates or whether it starts diluting. She looked at him directly. The people who go through this program in the next 3 years will be in positions of real institutional authority in a decade. That window is now. What gets planted in the next 3 years is what grows in 10. Ryan stood with that for a long moment. What do you need from this cohort? He asked. 3 people, she said. He looked at her. Not 31 excellent operators, she said. 3 people who understand what I've just told you, who have the combination of loyalty and clarity and courage I described, and who will still have it in 10 years when it costs something real to use it. She paused. 3 is enough. 3 is historically enough. Most lasting institutional change comes from very small numbers of very committed people who were in the right place at the right time and who didn't back down. Have you found them? Ryan asked. She held his gaze. I've found 2, she said. He stood completely still. Mitchell, she said, and her voice had a quality he hadn't heard in it before. Not warm exactly, something more serious than warm, something that carried weight and meant it. What happened on the mat on day 1, the part, nobody talks about the part, they always skip when they describe what happened, is that after I took you down, you asked how. You didn't defend, you didn't deflect, you didn't immediately try to reestablish position. You asked how, and you actually waited for the answer. She paused. That's rarer than you know. Most people in your position in that moment would have walked off the mat and found a different frame for what happened that protected the story they had about themselves. Ryan remembered the mat, the cold clarity of lying on it, the specific experience of the story cracking. I didn't have a better option, he said. You had the option everyone takes, she said. Reframe and move on. You didn't take it. She looked at him steadily. I don't know yet whether that means you're one of the 3, but it means you're close. And what you do in the next 5 days of this program will tell me. 5 days. Ryan hadn't realized they were that close to the end of the assessment period. The days had reorganized themselves into something that felt more continuous than sequential, less a countdown than an accumulation. Who's the second? He asked. She raised an eyebrow. You said you'd found 2, he said. Who's the second, not your information? She said with a trace of something that might have been amusement in a different context. He recognized Okafor's exact phrasing coming back at him and almost smiled. Fair, he said. She finished the cold coffee. Go get some sleep, she said. Tomorrow's session is going to be the hardest one of the program. Not because of what it asks you to do, because of what it asks you to be willing to say. He looked at her. What does it ask? It asks whether you'll tell the truth, she said. When the truth is inconvenient for you personally. She paused. But inconvenient in the abstract. Inconvenient in a specific documented official way that follows you in your record for the rest of your career. Ryan felt the weight of that settle. What kind of truth, he asked. The kind you already know, she said. You've known it since the mat. You've been carrying it since Walker's office. Tomorrow you'll be asked to put it somewhere official. She looked at him one last time. Sleep well. She walked away. He stood there for a minute. Then he went back inside and found Marcus in the barracks. Tomorrow's going to be something, Ryan said. Marcus was already on his bunk. He looked up. How something? The kind of something where they ask you to be honest on the record about something that costs you personally to be honest about. Marcus stared at him. You know what it is. Not exactly, Ryan said, but I know the shape of it. Marcus was quiet. You scared? Marcus asked. Ryan considered it honestly. No, he said. That's the weird part. 3 days ago, I would have been terrified of anything that put a complication in my record. Now he stopped finding the word. Now I'm more scared of what I'd be if I avoided it. Marcus looked at him for a long time. She did that, Marcus said. Not the first time he'd said it. We all did it, Ryan said. She just made the space for it to happen. He got into his bunk. I was asleep in 8 minutes, which was the fastest he had fallen asleep in 4 days, and the sleep was deep and uninterrupted. The kind that comes when the body has finally got the news that the person it carries has made a decision and is at peace with it. The next morning arrived at 0500 with the particular cold clarity of a day that already knows what it is. Ryan dressed in the dark. Marcus was already up, which was unusual. He was sitting on the edge of his bunk, lacing his boots with the careful attention of someone who needed something to do with their hands. You ready? Ryan said. Ask me in 6 hours, Marcus said. They walked to the main assessment hall together. The session began at 0600 with all 31 candidates seated Okafor at the front, 2 additional evaluators flanking him, whose names Ryan had not learned, and a document packet face down on every desk. This session, Okafor said, is the after-action assessment. You will review a series of operational scenarios, some from your time in this program, some historical. You will provide written evaluations of decision-making and leadership performance. He paused. Including your own. He let that land. You will document with specificity instances where your own judgment was flawed, where your decisions were driven by factors other than the mission objective, and where your performance fell below the standard you are capable of. He looked around the room. This is not a punitive exercise. The documentation goes into your permanent file not as a mark against you, but as evidence of the most important capability we assess in this program, the ability to see yourself accurately. He paused one final time. You have 3 hours. Ryan turned over the packet. The first page was a summary of the program's first day. He picked up the pen. He began to write. Not about the mat, not about Claire's demonstration of everything he had assumed he understood. He wrote about the yard, about the knife, about the specific chain of assumptions that had produced a moment where he had put a training blade into wood 6 inches from a colleague's hand and said in front of 30 people that women had no place in special operations. He wrote it plainly. He did not soften it. He did not contextualize it in ways that spread the responsibility. He wrote it as his decision made from his assumptions, producing his actions, and he documented the assumptions with the same forensic clarity that Claire had used to document 14 months of institutional failure, because that was what the exercise was asking for. And because he finally understood that the ability to see yourself clearly was not weakness. It was the most dangerous skill in the building. And for the first time in his life, Ryan Mitchell was learning to use it. 3 rows behind him, Marcus Webb was writing. Somewhere in the room, a third person was writing something honest that would cost them something real. And in the observation section, quiet and still, and carrying everything she had always carried, Claire Dawson watched the cohort she had come back for and began, for the first time in 4 days, to look like someone who might have found what she was looking for. Ryan finished writing at 0853. He put the pen down and read back through what he had written, not to edit it, but to confirm it, to make sure the words on the page were the words he actually meant, and not a softer version that his instincts had quietly substituted somewhere in the 3 hours of writing. He had done that before in his life, written toward honesty and arrived somewhere more comfortable without noticing the drift. This time the drift hadn't happened. What was on the page was what had actually occurred. The assumptions, the decision, the knife, the words, the specific mechanism of a mind so certain of its own read That incoming evidence had simply not registered as evidence. He turned the packet face down. Around him, other candidates were still writing. He could hear it, the particular sound of a room full of people engaged in something that costs them the quality of silence, that isn't actually silent but carries weight in every breath and pen stroke. Marcus was 2 rows back, and Ryan didn't turn to look, but he could feel Marcus still working the way you can feel someone you know well doing something difficult. At Ocean in 800, Akifer said, pencils down, and the sound of that specific silence, the silence after the cost has been paid and before anyone knows what it purchased, filled the room completely. Nobody spoke for a moment. Then Okafor said, leave the packets on the desk, 15-minute break. Back here at 09:15 for the final group scenario. People stood slowly, the way people stand when they've been somewhere that required something of them and are readjusting to the ordinary physics of a room. Marcus appeared at Ryan's shoulder. His face was the face of someone who had just done something he couldn't undo and was still deciding how he felt about that. Done, Marcus said. Yeah, Ryan said. That was Marcus stopped. Yeah, Ryan said again. They walked out together without saying anything else because some experiences don't need language right away. They need air and a few minutes of ordinary movement before they can be talked about without the talking changing what they were. Outside, Priya Ose fell into step beside them. She looked at neither of them directly. She was looking at the middle distance the way people look when they're processing something internally while maintaining external function. I wrote about the rotation, she said. Ryan glanced at her. Which part? The part where I saw the information and looked away, she said. I wrote about what was actually driving that. She paused. Not operationally, personally, why I looked away. What did you say? Marcus asked. She was quiet for a moment. I said I looked away because I was more afraid of looking uncertain in front of the team than I was of making the wrong call, and that I had spent enough of my career making that exact trade that I had stopped noticing I was making it. She paused again. It's in my permanent file now. Ryan looked at her. How does that feel? She considered it honestly the way he was learning, people who had actually grown did, without reaching for the comfortable answer first. Terrifying, she said, and correct. She finally looked at him. Those two things apparently can be true at the same time. Yeah, Ryan said, I'm learning that. The final group scenario began at 09:15. It was the most complex problem the program had run all week. A multi-layered operational scenario with 6 simultaneous moving parts. A command structure that required 3 different candidates to hold leadership roles simultaneously, and a set of parameters that guaranteed the scenario would not be solvable within the allotted time using only the original plan. It was designed to fail, not to punish, to reveal, to show in a live and documented and fully observed context what each person did when the plan stopped working and the clock was still running and the people around them were looking for something to hold on to. Ryan was assigned as one of the 3 simultaneous command leads. Priya was the second, Marcus was the third. The first 8 minutes were controlled chaos structured enough that the 3 of them could maintain their individual sectors, complicated enough that communication between sectors was constant and demanding. Ryan ran his sector the way he had been learning to run things all week, by trusting the people in it, by asking what they were seeing before deciding what to do, by holding the objective clearly and holding the structure loosely. At minute 9, the scenario collapsed. Not at the edges, at the center. The communications link between the 3 command leads went down simultaneously. Not degraded this time, gone, and the 6 moving parts of the scenario began pulling in directions that the original plan had not accounted for, because the original plan had assumed the link would hold. Ryan's sector held its objective and went still. He had no contact with Marcus, no contact with Priya, no way to coordinate. He had his team and his read in the objective, and the knowledge that somewhere in the same building 2 people he trusted were making calls he couldn't hear. He made a decision. He sent 2 of his 7 team members to find Marcus's sector and establish physical contact. He sent one to find Priya's sector. He kept 4 on the primary objective, with instructions that were simple enough to survive the loss of his presence. Hold the position, do not advance, do not retreat, wait for contact. Then he moved. He went to find Marcus himself, not because the plan required it, because when communication fails and the center collapses, the most important thing is not to optimize your own sector. The most important thing is to find out what the other leaders know that you don't and build something shared out of 3 partial pictures. He found Marcus in 40 seconds. Marcus had been moving toward him. They met in the middle. Status, Ryan said. Sector 2 holding. Lost contact with everything. You. Same. Sent people to Priya. She's in Sector 3, southeast corner. What's the objective priority if we can't reconnect the plan? Marcus said. Whatever keeps the most people in play, the longest, Ryan said immediately. We're past solving the original scenario. We're in triage. It's still recoverable by sight. Marcus thought for exactly 2 seconds. Secondary objective. It's the only one all 3 sectors can contribute to independently without the primary link. Go, Ryan said. They split. Ryan went back to his sector, reorganized around the secondary objective, and spent the next 11 minutes running the most genuinely collaborative piece of tactical work he had done in his career. Not because it was elegant, but because it was built entirely from relationship and trust and shared understanding, rather than from infrastructure that had already proven it could fail. They did not complete the scenario. Nobody did. It had not been designed for completion. What happened at the debrief changed the room. Colonel Walker ran the debrief himself, which was the first time all week he had been present for a session evaluation. He sat at the front of the room with the scenario documentation in his hands, and he went through it phase by phase, and when he reached the moment of the communications collapse, he stopped. At minute 9, Walker said 3 command leads lost simultaneous contact. Standard protocol in that situation is to hold sector and wait for reestablishment. He looked around the room. Nobody held and waited. Walk me through what actually happened. Ryan spoke first. He described the decision to send team members across sectors to establish physical contact. He described going to find Marcus himself. He described the conversation 40 seconds, 2 decisions, then execution. He described reorganizing around the secondary objective because the primary had become unreachable. Walker listened without expression. Then Marcus described his side of the same 40 seconds. Then Priya described Sector 3, where she had received Ryan's messenger at minute 11 and reorganized independently based on the same read, not because she had been told to, but because when the messenger explained what Ryan and Marcus had done, she understood immediately what the logic was and matched it. 3 sectors, 0 communication, same decision. Walker set down the documentation. In 11 years of running this program, he said, that has never happened. 3 simultaneous command leads, 0 contact, arriving at the same tactical adjustment independently and executing in coordination without a shared communication channel. He paused. That doesn't happen because of training. That happens because 3 people share enough understanding of what matters and enough trust in each other's judgment that the communication channel becomes secondary. The room was very quiet. That's what this program was designed to produce, Walker said. Not the technical performance. That. He stood up. Assessment period concludes at 1700 today. Graduation ceremony at 1900. He walked out. The room held its breath for a moment. Then 31 people began slowly to talk. Ryan sat in it and felt something he couldn't immediately name. Not pride, not relief, something quieter and more permanent. The feeling of having built something real in a very short time, of having been changed by a week in ways that would not reverse when the week ended. He looked toward the observation section. Claire was gone. He found out why 20 minutes later, when Okafor pulled him aside with a look that had something new in it, not quite urgency, but the compressed energy of someone who needs to say something efficiently. Walker's office, Okafor said. Now. Ryan went. When he got there, Walker was behind his desk and Claire was in the chair across from it. Not the chair Walker had moved to Ryan's side of the desk 2 nights ago, but the chair across from it, the formal distance. And Ryan understood immediately that something official was happening. Sit down, Walker said to Ryan, gesturing to a second chair along the wall. Ryan sat. Walker looked at Claire. Tell him. Claire looked at Ryan directly. The call Walker received yesterday morning, she said. The person who used the word compromised. I know who it was. Ryan waited. Brigadier General Harold Marsh, she said. He was a lieutenant colonel 14 years ago. He was the second level of the chain that buried my initial report. He received the administrative finding from the IG review. He was passed over for promotion once, and then promoted because his superiors decided the finding had been sufficient. She paused. He has a house in North Carolina. I told you about him. Ryan stared at her. He knows you're here, Ryan said. Well, he's known since day 2, she said. Someone in the administrative processing chain flagged my name when the evaluation authorization came through. It went up. It reached him. She paused. He waited until he had a specific angle. The angle he's using is that my presence here creates an appearance of bias in the program's evaluation because of my history with the IG process that any report I produce will look retaliatory rather than objective. That's not a legal argument, Ryan said. That's a narrative one. Yes, she said, it doesn't have to be legal. It only has to be plausible enough that people above Walker use it to deprioritize the report's findings. She looked at him. It's the same mechanism as the first time. Different words, same function. Ryan looked at Walker. What are you doing about it? Walker's face was controlled. I've submitted a formal response documenting the basis for Dawson's authorization and the methodology of the evaluation. I've attached the program's design documentation which formally credits her as the architect to establish that her involvement represents continuity of expertise, not conflict of interest. He paused. I've also sent a copy of the scenario from this morning's final assessment with the debrief documentation directly to 2 people in the chain above Marsh, who have the authority to receive it and the institutional history to understand what it means. Going around him, Ryan said. Going to the right people, Walker said. Ryan looked at Claire. Is that enough, he asked. She held his gaze. I don't know yet, she said. It was the first time she had said those words to him, the first time he had heard uncertainty in her voice, not weakness, not doubt, but the honest acknowledgement that some outcomes are not controllable. What I know is that the report exists. The methodology is documented. The authorization is on record. Whatever Marsh does with the next 2 weeks, he cannot make those things not exist. The same thing you said about this morning's phone call, Ryan said. Yes, she said, but existing isn't the same as changing anything, Ryan said, echoing back the words she had said to him 2 nights ago. She looked at him. No, she said, it's not. She paused. That's why the report isn't the only thing. Ryan went still. What's the other thing, he asked. Walker said the 3 candidates she identifies in the report. Their names go into the official program documentation as high-potential institutional leadership development designations. That designation affects assignment preferences, mentorship assignments, and long-term career trajectory in ways that are bureaucratically separate from anything Marsh has authority over. He looked at Ryan steadily. He can challenge the report's credibility. He cannot challenge an institutional designation that's been entered through proper channels before he can build a case. Ryan understood. The designation was the real mechanism. The report documented what had been found. The designation put the people who had been found into positions where they could do something with what they knew in a time frame that preceded any bureaucratic countermove. When does the designation go in? Ryan asked. Tonight, Walker said, before the graduation ceremony. Ryan sat with that for a moment. She's already written the report, he said. It was not a question. Walker glanced at Claire. The evaluation period formally ends at 1700, Walker said carefully. Ryan looked at Claire. She said nothing, which was its own kind of answer. He stood up. I'll see you at 1900, he said to Walker. He looked at Claire. Thank you, he said. She looked at him. Don't thank me yet, she said. The designation is the beginning. What you do with it is what matters. She paused. I've given people opportunities before. Some of them used them. Some of them got comfortable and stopped seeing clearly. Her voice was level and entirely serious. I need you to understand that what I'm trusting you with is not a reward, it's a responsibility. The kind that doesn't get lighter the higher you go. It gets heavier, because the higher you are, the more the institution listens when you speak. And the more it listens, the more it matters whether what you're saying is true. Ryan held her gaze. I understand, he said. Show me, she said. In 10 years, show me. He walked out. The graduation ceremony at 1900 was the kind of military event that was formal without being performative. Dress uniforms, a structured program, official words from Walker about the program and its purpose certificates distributed in a sequence that followed rank. Rather than performance, the institutional ritual of completion observed in its proper form. Ryan stood in his row and went through it, what he was actually doing underneath the standing in the ceremony, in the handshake with Walker. and the certificate in his hand was thinking about a woman on a bench cleaning a training knife. I was thinking about the specific quality of a person who could sit in complete stillness while someone grabbed what was in her hands and drove it into wood 6 inches from her fingers and said she didn't belong there, and who could do that without collapsing inward or exploding outward, but simply watching, simply taking in what was happening and filing it as information about the world. He was thinking about what that cost, not the specific incident. The accumulated cost of being that person for 14 years of being right and being buried and coming back and being right again and building something that got handed to someone else and watching the thing you built begin to drift and coming back again. Because the people who died in the field, because nobody listened the first time, were still the people who died in the field. And that fact did not become less true because the institution found it inconvenient. I was thinking about the still gray eyes and what it took to keep them still. After the ceremony, the cohort gathered in the common area with the informal relief of people who have survived something together. People who had been careful around each other all week became suddenly generous. The pressure released, the competition concluded, something genuine emerging in the space where performance had been. Ryan moved through it and stopped when he found Claire standing near the door. She had not changed out of her day uniform for the ceremony. She was holding a cup of coffee that was probably also cold. She looked the same as she had looked on the first morning on the bench, except that Ryan was looking at her with completely different eyes, and so she was entirely different. "You're leaving," he said. "Tomorrow morning," she said. "Early?" He nodded. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Yes." "The third candidate," he said. "The one you hadn't found when you told me you'd found two." He paused. "Did you find them?" Claire looked at him for a moment. "Priya Ose," she said. Ryan absorbed that. He thought about the equipment storage room, about what she had said. "I saw the information and looked away." About the word terrifying, followed by the word correct. "She wrote it down," Ryan said. "She wrote it with more precision than most people twice her age could manage," Claire said. "She identified the exact mechanism of her own avoidance and documented it clearly enough that anyone reading it could use it as a diagnostic for the same pattern in themselves." She paused. "That's not a confession. That's a contribution." She turned her own failure into institutional knowledge. "She'll be good," Ryan said. "She already is," Claire said. "What she'll become is the question. Same as you, same as Webb." They stood in a silence that was comfortable now in a way it had not been capable of being a week ago. "Dawson," Ryan said. "Yes." "What you said about carrying it," he said. "The people who died, the 14 months of documentation. The reports that got buried," he paused. "You said you'd carry it forever." "Yes," she said. "How?" he asked. She looked at him. It was a real question, and she knew it was a real question, and she gave it the weight of a real question. "By making it mean something," she said. "That's the only honest answer I have. I carry it by refusing to let it be the end of the story. Every time the institution tries to make my history the reason to discount the work, every time someone uses the word compromised or conflict of interest or too personal, I carry it by continuing to do the work anyway, because the work is what the carrying is for." She paused. "You'll carry things too. You already do. Everyone who stays in long enough and keeps their eyes open carries things. The question isn't whether you carry them. The question is whether what you're carrying makes you heavier or stronger." Ryan thought about the after-action document, about writing the truth of what had happened in the yard and feeling clean afterward rather than diminished. "I think I'm beginning to understand the difference," he said. "Good," she said. "Hold on to that. It's easy to understand it now at the end of a week that went a particular way. It's harder to hold on to when the week hasn't gone that way. When the institution pushes back and the people above you are using words like compromised, and the report is sitting in a file somewhere, waiting for someone with the courage to act on it." She looked at him directly. "That's when you find out whether you actually understand the difference or whether you just understood it in a context that made it easy." "I'll find out," he said. "Yes," she said. "You will." She put down the cup. She picked up the jacket she had set on the chair beside her. "Mitchell," she said. "Yes." She looked at him one final time with those still gray eyes. "You grabbed my knife out of my hand on day one, McDonough," she said. "You put a blade into wood 6 inches from my fingers and told 30 people I didn't belong there." She paused. And then you spent the rest of the weekend becoming someone who would never do that. She held his gaze. That's the story I'm going to tell when people ask me why this cohort mattered. Ryan stood completely still. Not the scenario this morning, he said. The scenario this morning was the proof, she said. The proof doesn't matter without the story. She paused. The story is what teaches. She walked out. He stood where she had left him for a long moment. Marcus appeared at his shoulder. She's gone, Marcus said. Leaving in the morning, Ryan said. Marcus was quiet. You talked to her? Yeah. And Ryan looked at the door. And I think I finally understand what kind of work we actually signed up for, he said. Marcus absorbed that. Harder than we thought. Different, Ryan said. Not harder. Different. Well, the hard part isn't the scenarios. The hard part is staying honest when it costs something. Staying clear when the institution wants you to be convenient. He paused. She's been doing that for 14 years, against people with significantly more authority than anything we're going to face for a long time. Marcus was quiet. Then he said, you think we'll do it actually when it matters. Ryan turned away from the door. He thought about the mat, the document, the 40 seconds in the collapse scenario when he and Marcus had found each other in the middle and built something from two partial pictures and trust. Yeah, he said, I think we will. Because of this week. Because of her, Ryan said. Because she came back when she didn't have to and gave us something she could have kept to herself. Because she built a program from the evidence of people who died and then watched it get handed to someone else and came back anyway. He paused. Because when someone does that for you, you don't waste it. You don't get to waste it. Marcus nodded. They stood together in the ordinary noise of a ceremony winding down around them. 31 people who had come to Black Ridge to become better operators, most of whom had succeeded at exactly that, and 3 of whom had become something harder to name and more important. The week ended. The designations were entered into the official record before midnight, in a system that Marsh had no administrative access to authorized under Walker's signature documented, alongside the evaluation methodology and the program's founding architecture and the name of the person who had built all of it. Claire Dawson left Fort Black Ridge at 05:30 the next morning. No ceremony, no announcement. The same way she had arrived quietly without performance, taking up the exact amount of space she needed and no more. She left behind 3 people who understood what they were carrying and why it mattered. She left behind a report that existed. She left behind a program that for the first time in 3 years was running at the standard it had been designed to reach. And she left behind something that would take a decade to fully see, but that had already in the space of 1 week begun its work, the slow, irreversible process of an institution being changed from the inside by people who had learned to see it clearly and had chosen at genuine personal cost to keep seeing it that way. Ryan Mitchell stood on the track at 05:45 and watched the vehicle that carried her reach the main gate and pass through it and turn onto the road beyond. He stood there for a while after it was gone. Then he turned back toward the building. He had work to do, not because he had been designated, not because the report had documented his potential, not because a week at Black Ridge had transformed him into something he hadn't been before, but because a woman with still gray eyes had spent 14 years carrying what she carried and building what she built, and coming back when she didn't have to. And the only honest response to that kind of life was to make sure it meant something. That was the lesson, not the knife skills, not the mat, not the communications protocol, or the scenario methodology, or the 3-part framework of loyalty and clarity and courage. The lesson was simpler and harder and more permanent than any of those things. The lesson was that true capability doesn't announce itself. It doesn't need an audience. It doesn't require the institution's permission or the crowd's acknowledgement or the right moment to finally feel worthy of the work. It simply does the work, quietly, completely, for as long as the work requires. And when the institution buries it, it comes back. And when the institution buries it again, it comes back again. Because the work is not about the institution. The work is about the people the institution is supposed to serve. And some people never forget that. Some people sit on a bench and clean a blade with an unhurried motion and wait with all the patience of someone who has already survived everything being thrown at them for the right moment to show the world exactly what they are. Claire Dawson had been that person for 14 years. Ryan Mitchell had spent 1 week learning what it cost her He intended to spend the rest of his career making sure it was worth it.